Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Crypto Leviathan podcast. I'm your host Dalibor. This is my co-host Andrew. Today we have a very special guest on the line. He is the founder of Theia. So let's welcome him. Do you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, hi guys. My name's Rorke Kuttel. I'm one of the co-founders at Theia. And yeah, I really appreciate you guys for bringing me on.
Yeah, we love to have you on. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your background, how you started in crypto, and what made you actually found this company, a bit of your journey?
Yeah, of course. So, God, I think my first exposure to crypto, I'm 22, and my first exposure, I think, was a lot of guys that were kind of my age, which was, purchasing some Bitcoin when you were like 15 or 16 to buy a couple fake IDs or something. It was just very nonchalant. And obviously, around that point, it was 2014, 2015. It was kind of pre the initial real surge that Bitcoin took, right? So obviously, you heard some things in the news, but I was in high school. I wasn't as plugged into some guys where I wish I was, but so, I let some of those things pass me by. But really where I got more heavily involved was in college. So when I was in my first couple of years, I jumped right into computer science, and then more specifically into augmented and virtual reality. So I did a lot of development, but also computer graphics was really my thing. Like I loved modeling, animation, rendering, and working in game engines, whether it's Unity, Unreal, or just even coding, rendering algorithms, all that kind of stuff. I just kind of fell hand over fist into that work. And so when I started working in AR and VR, I just had a really cool opportunity to work at the knife's edge of some emerging tech. The Oculus Quest had just come out, which is the first obviously kind of wireless self-contained VR system. And obviously it wasn't necessarily as good as Valve system or even the previous tethered Oculus system from a processing standpoint, but that made the challenge a lot more, you had to optimize things, and there was all this, it just made me kind of work into that whole system even more. And it started with school projects, and then school projects turned into projects with friends, and then projects with friends turned into Discord groups, and then you're into other Discord groups. And then before I knew it, I was really around a lot of the people that were doing a lot of the early heavy lifting with digital assets and on the back end side of things, mostly the NFT, kind of back in 2017, 2018 sort of territory. Even some of the guys who were doing Decentraland back in the day, even they were minting those plots even back then, right? And so coming from the VR background, I had ripped models from video games and repurpose them for VR chat and stuff. And so I kind of got to overthink the whole process and was like, oh, there's something really cool here. This is really fun. And also I think I had my older brother was, really into a lot of MMOs back in the day. He was huge into EVE Online and even World of Warcraft. And so I kind of understood the play to earn angle as well, because I was they're already doing a lot of this stuff. There's so much, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars getting poured into these games in a secondary market way, but there's just no efficient mechanism, right? So I just kind of got to overthink oh, there's so much utility in the NFT, whether it was in the VR side or the gaming side. And then so that got me involved in some projects, and then in some ways financially, and then obviously the kind of the PFP wave sort of came along, and that sort of came on.
Do you want to explain to people what a PFP is first?
Yeah, so it's the funny thing I remember is half the world thought it meant profile picture, but it was actually picture for God, what is it? It's pass verification. I can't remember, but it's basically just a verifiable picture that's the utilities leveraged from the behind the scenes. So the picture element of it is superficial. It's what you do with it, right? So it's you see that with the with like, the Bored Ape Yacht Club, for example, like, they've leveraged the access that these, images provide, into their whole network, right, into their whole brand, and they're building out a whole ecosystem as a result. And so I kind of got to ride into that, wave. Like I was kind of around in some of the really early like Beeple auctions. I remember, when he was kind of doing things, and that was more just straight art. And then like I remember like early 2021, with when like the apes came along, and then like punks had obviously already blown up, and so I was, in with a little bit of that, sold out of Bored Apes way too early, but whatever. And then it was into some other projects like Oni Force and everything, and it was fun riding the speculative wave. Obviously, that's cool. It's fun when you're into something and then it becomes a lot more valuable. But really, I was foreseeing both a lot of the ways that the tech was going to be used really well and how it was going to be used really transformationally, but then also ultimately how things were going to like progress on the speculative side. Like it's hard not to see, even when it's a relatively small circle, that like more and more people are going to want to get in on the gold rush, right? And that wave was going to like tumble into itself like more and more and more. And so like legitimacy would turn into illegitimacy, and projects that would fulfill their mints would run. You started seeing more and more rugs and more scams and all this stuff. And I just knew that was kind of polluting the discourse in a lot of ways. Like, obviously, if you throw around the word NFT in like public circles, it's not the best connotation. Like, it's really like, it doesn't garner like the best, the first reaction is like, ugh,
scam.
Yeah, it's like, and that's sort of sad, right? Because there's so much that's cool about it. There's so much that's really, really cool. And it kind of breaks my heart sometimes on the gaming side of things, because like, especially in a lot of gaming circles, they're like, God forbid NFTs are ever like near a video game, because it's, it's just scams, it's just a money grab, it's all this stuff. And I'm like, I want to just be like, no, there's actually some really cool stuff here. And there's a way in which you can make your experience so much more like worthwhile without money ever being a factor, just as a piece of tech. And so really, like, I knew a lot of the problems with that, and a lot of the problems with a lot of crypto projects in general, like as more and more were coming in, was just this sort of paradoxical relationship between money up front, deliver later. Like, if you're an NFT project, a lot of them, even if they had the best of teams, all the money that they would use to deliver their roadmap would come from the mint, right? It would come from like, okay, we'll mint, we'll fulfill, we'll get all this money, like it could be millions of dollars, and then we'll go and we'll deliver the products. Like and we hope that the speculation kind of keeps us alive for a little bit, right? So if the art's cool and there's enough people that dogpiled in, we'll get enough secondary market volume that we like stay relevant. And then as we like layer in the utility, we can solidify ourselves, right? And there's some teams that did that really well. Like Ozkey did that really well, obviously. Like, they've built an incredible brand, and because they got an incredible team, and Bored Apes has obviously done that incredibly. I mean, they were a first mover in many ways, so they had that advantage, but obviously they've done an incredible job. Like Punks has been around forever, and they really, Larva Labs didn't really do anything with that, but like, they, ever since Bored Apes bought them out, obviously they'll be included in that whole verse. And so like, even just on the PFP side of things, like there was still this problem of like, we'll raise all this money and then we'll make something cool. And then you had on the play to earn side of things, you had like things like Pixelmon that was just like a total rug in like in a hilarious way. That was like, they raised 70 million from a Dutch auction of, their initial NFT launch, and they're never going to make that game. Like the kid, like I know some guys who know that kid, and he's like 18 years old. He made $70 million. There's no way. Like, there's just no accountability, right? There's just like, there's no reason why you'd like then go on to make a game, especially after you've like totally failed. And so really, like I had a couple of friends, like one of my friends who actually became a co-founder at Theia was he was rugged out of like Evolved Apes, which is a really famous one that happened during the summer. And he was just like, look, man, like I know that there's cool stuff here, but I just don't want to get rugged. Like, I just don't want to, or at the very least, if I feel like that's going to happen, I want to be able to get out. Like the problem is when you get into an NFT project, you're now holding the bag. You have this asset that if things become undesirable in the team, it can be so hard to move that. And so really I was approached by him, and he had a friend who had come up with a lot of the mechanisms that became Theia. And we started building it from there. We started building a way in which projects can raise money and are held accountable, and that investors only have to get fully exposed to the projects once they're completely comfortable, and once they're comfortable that project's going to deliver. And then the project really only raises all the money that it would ever raise, like at an NFT launch, when investors feel that confidence. And so that we're really just trying to align incentives again. And we're trying to keep all the accessibility and openness that crypto has to offer because we love it. But we just want everybody to be aligned so that, investors and project founders are at the same level, and that they're both, coming together to build something great, really.
Sure. So it sounds a lot like what happens in Kickstarter and Indiegogo, where people back these projects that don't go anywhere. It seems like the same thing's happening in the NFT space.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the same thing. And it's funny because we're trying to evolve in terms of those guys as well, right? Like Kickstarter and it's just those were the original rugs in many ways, right? Like those are the original like soft rugs and hard rugs. It was like you go on Kickstarter and these guys like put all these pictures for a really sick project. They get a ton of money and then they just never deliver. And it's like, well, what the hell, right? And it's because they just get all the money up front, and also the people who put the money in can't take it out. They can't leave. They can't, if they lose confidence or whatever, they're just stuck. And it's a crappy relationship.
I think it goes back to the point of credibility, right? So if you start a Kickstarter or raising money for an NFT project, you better hope that person is a credible person, right? Because the likelihood of them actually following through, if they're just some random, is not likely at all.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, and the problem is obviously is as the market becomes more and more oversaturated, the proportion of nice people to not nice people just gets worse and worse. And then the problem is the people who are good teams, the people who do want to deliver and have a good vision and can deliver, get lost in the shuffle. They because they're doing the same thing. That's the only way to work. They still have to mint an NFT. They still have to build a community the same way that everybody else does. And so they get treated and lumped in this bag with everybody else. And you get projects that struggle to get up over water when they should really be head and shoulders above everybody else, because they're just sitting in this sea of like garbage.
And both platforms, both Kickstarter as well as the NFT markets, both have had very silly projects. So remember Kickstarter, when it first started out, there was a guy who said he's raising money to make a bowl of mac and cheese, and he raised like $16,000 or $20,000. And I don't know if it was OpenSea, but there was a guy who sold an NFT with it was a picture of a Post-it where he just wrote test on it, and that sold for like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah. And some of that's fun, right? Like some of that's like, hey, if everybody understands what the deal is and it's a bit of a meme, like that's cool. Like that's kind of the internet just being like whatever. But there's like what we can't, what sometimes it's just like what we hate really is when people are taken for a ride, right? They're just like, they're promised one thing and then they get not even close to it at all or nothing. Right. And, obviously Pixelmon's the hilarious example where it's like you see all these like beautiful, like voxelized creatures and environments. And then like when the mint actually happens, it's like, oh my God, like it's like it was horrible. Like and it's laughable. And it's laughable, but it's also like really despicable and really sad because that sets a bad precedent that pushes the industry and the faith in this kind of tech back even more. And so, we just think the primary reasons for that is because when you're locked in, you're locked in. There's no way to There's no way to hold the projects accountable with the dollars that you're potentially going to give them. And so that's what we were really trying to change.
So how are you changing that though? Because crypto is inherently decentralized, right? So how are you gonna? You have to centralize some parts of this, I imagine.
Well, so that's where we get a bit clever. So we are still in an open and permissionless platform at the end of the day. But so we have a protocol and a curation layer. So let me talk about the protocol layer. That because this is where this is where a lot of the kind of money up front stuff kind of happens, and this is where we can kind of fix it. So when a project wants to raise money on a platform like Theia or us, what they do is they deposit a allocation of their native asset. Like let's say you're a DeFi project and you're releasing a coin, and you'll deposit 10% of your coin allocation, as if you were to do like an ICO, just like a coin listing. Instead of doing it like that, you put the 10% here. And then what we do, and what happens on the protocol, is that when investors come to invest into your project, they pay, spend with whatever currency they want, Ether, USDC, whatever, and they receive what we call project tokens, minted by the protocol in return. Now, these project tokens, you're not buying like the native asset of the actual company. You're buying something that's representative of ownership into it. So you're not buying like their actual coin. You're buying something that's minted by the protocol and basically says you can convert this representative token into a proportional ownership of that 10%, basically. And then by doing that, that allows us to set some rules for how these representative tokens behave. So basically, we leverage a bonding curve algorithm, so that what that means is that every time a token is brought into supply through a purchase, so if somebody buys a token, the next token bought or sold is more expensive. And every time a token is taken off the market through a sale, every token then is bought or sold is less expensive, basically. And so what that means is that basically when somebody invests and receives these project tokens, a certain small portion of the money that they invest goes to the project up front. So a project sets what's called the commission rate. So let's say 5% or 10, but let's say 5%. Basically, when somebody puts $100 in, $5 will go to the project up front. That is their money. They can do with it whatever they want at that given moment. The rest of the money, like the $95, gets locked in the smart contract of the protocol. So it basically literally just gets locked in the protocol, and it actually forms a liquidity pool. And what that means is that the protocol can now buy back the project tokens that the person just bought. So if I bought, 2 project tokens and they, for some reason it cost $100, that's not the math, but let's just say that. And so $5 will go to the project immediately. And then if I wanted to sell, I could sell back to the protocol and it will buy back my tokens for $95 because I'm basically taking out the liquidity that I put in. Now, okay, I lost $5 in the process, but that's a whole lot better than losing $100 or losing, whatever. And it's guaranteed because you're not looking for a counterparty. You're not looking for somebody else to buy these tokens off of you. The protocol buys them back. And when they're bought back, these representative tokens are burned. And so the global supply of these tokens comes down. And then the price of the next token bought or sold comes down with it because there's less liquidity, for the protocol to buy back these tokens. So basically, how this allows us to create this mathematical cover so that every single token on the market that represents ownership of a project's assets can be bought back. So nobody's ever left holding the bag. So if you want to sell, if you want to get out, if you don't want to be involved in this project anymore, you can sell and you can, make a very little loss or even potentially a gain depending on where you bought in, and you can leave. And then how this finishes is that once a project raises a certain amount of money that they set, It's called the minimum funding threshold. A conversion period kicks off. Consider this like a vesting period. So it's like basically the project's looking to raise $10,000. Once they raise that $10,000, then a conversion period of which they can set, it can be as low as 1 week or as long as really infinitely long, kicks off. And then basically every week during that period, a proportional amount of that native asset that they deposited, so in this example, the 10% of the coins, is up for conversion. So basically, all the investors can convert some of their project tokens to a proportion of that native asset. So I can basically say, all right, you know what? I like what the project's doing. They've convinced me that they're doing some cool stuff. Let me get some of what they're offering. That could be coins, NFTs, NFT mint rights, fractional ownership of a fractionalized NFT, etc. And then once an investor converts these representative tokens to the ownership of basically the coin, once they take the coin out, the money that they put into the liquidity pool, like the $95 in this example, gets released to the project. So the project gets the rest of the money. So it's basically the investor saying, all right, guys, I'm confident enough in what you're doing that I'm going to give you the rest of the money that I invested. And so now I'll take whatever you're offering and you can take the rest of my money and you can now go and deliver. And basically what that does is, it holds a project accountable, because if, during this whole conversion period, investors can sell at any time. So if they're not feeling it, if they're not feeling what you guys are doing with the money that you guys have raised so far, if you guys can't show if you're a DeFi protocol and you don't have any code to show, or you don't have any you don't have any demos to show, or or if you're an NFT project, you don't have some partnerships or roadmaps to show, or art to show even, or whatever, or you're a play to earn game, you don't have any demos or progress in the game, investors set their own standards. They can be like, all right, you know what, I'm out. I don't want to be involved with what you guys are doing anymore. And then they leave, right? And so that basically brings projects aligned and kind of reined in, so that they they're always delivering for investors, so that they at the very end can unlock all the money that they would then need to do the rest, right? So it basically just kind of holds a project a little bit more accountable, while allowing investors the full autonomy to choose whether to be all the way in or all the way out. And then they can take some of their money or even more money with them in the process.
How many projects do you have currently on the platform?
So right now we're actually we have a testnet prototype, which is where we're basically just doing the final touch-ups on the core system, and then we'll be pushing that prototype to the main net, in which we actually will just do a community raise in the same way, but we're the only project. So we'll actually have our community raise money for us. And we'll issue project tokens and all these things, and then we have actually a full permissionless launch slated for June. So that's when we have the full system, ready to go, and anybody can create a project, anybody can create a market, etc. And so we're still in the development stages, but as we move to that June launch date, we have multiple stages. So I just mentioned the community fundraise, and then we have a soft launch in which we do a pre-curated selection of projects, and then when we move to the permissionless stage in June, then anybody can curate projects, anybody can invest into projects, and we've already made a really great selection of partnerships with some projects that need funding, and then also some communities that would be looking to onboard some projects as well. Because
sorry, I have a question here. So did you say you have to approve these projects that come through?
Yeah. So I'm really glad you said that. So we have this protocol layer, which I just went through. But on top of it, we have a curation layer. Now, we want to be a social investment platform in its purest form. Like, we want to be permissionless. So we want to decentralize the due diligence process. So the one thing we don't like about launch pads and even like old school crowdfunding platforms like WeFunder or Start Engine or like kind of the Web 2 versions is that they're so choked. Like, it's like this like single group of people that do all the due diligence, and they get thousands of projects and applications all the time. And it's just a really inefficient way for like projects to be accessible to raise money, right? You know, that was the kind of the beauty of Kickstarter in some ways, because like anybody could put a project up to get kickstarted, right? You know, yes, there were the people that like were the approval, what do they call them? They were like approval people that like they gave you like a verified sticker, like, oh, these guys are super good, you should totally kickstart them, right? So they had their own kind of centralized deal, but they, you know, really anybody could put up a project. On Theia, we have these things called markets, what we're calling markets, which is basically treat it like a community VC, almost like a community venture capital fund. And what they do is they onboard projects onto the platform. So if I'm like an expert, or I'm a big figure in the play to earn space, and basically projects can come to my market, play to earn games that are looking to raise money. And I can choose, like, okay, I like these guys. I'll onboard them onto my market. And then I become the sole destination on the platform for that project to raise money. And in doing so, the market actually earns revenue, because the market sets a commission rate for all investments made into every project underneath that market. So going back to my previous example, where when somebody spends $100 and 5% goes to the projects, and this also, let's say 5% would go directly to the market. And that's you can call it like a finder's fee, you can call it like a, whatever. But basically, the market is incentivized to onboard projects that act in the interests of investors and draw consistent investment volume, over time, right? Because if you're onboarding a project that's doing well, that investors feel really confident in it, and more people are confident in investing in that project, and so on and so forth, and you have a good track record, then you just have consistent revenue that's coming straight to the market creator. And so these that's basically how our system becomes permissionless, because the platform, when in its fullest extent, you'll have markets that can be off of any vertical. You could be a DeFi market, you can be a market that's centered on fractionalized NFTs for the music industry, you could be a market that's set on for play to earn games, you could be a market that's set on for play to earn idle RPGs, like super specific or quite broad. And we create a competitive atmosphere because markets are competing for the best projects, and projects are competing to get onto the best markets because they draw the most amount of investors, and so on and so forth. But the thing is, they're all competing for investors. They're competing for the investors' interests. So instead of everybody like kind of being aligned to where like projects are just trying to raise money and competing amongst one another to like have like a dog pile, they're really competing for people's assurance that they're going to perform, right? They're competing for, markets are competing so that people come in and invest into the projects in a way that's like, hey, we do good due diligence here, because they set the rules. They can do, their due diligence could be whatever. It can be KYC checks or full docs teams are required, KYC AMLs, code audits, or it can literally be whatever the market wants. And they can make that framework really clear. And so an investor can come to them with the confidence whenever a project's onboarded that like, hey, they've given them the thumbs up, and that means something, right? And so, we have this, we're not constrained, as a platform. We're not like, yes, we are pre-curating projects as we decentralize, but to the, in the full decentralized permissionless platform that'll launch kind of in June, it'll be wide open. But we have this kind of rigid infrastructure that makes sure that process works, right? You could have like all this this cool, like, all right, yeah, we're decentralizing the due diligence and everything and all that, and that's all well and good, but if it's not underpinned by something that's solid, then it won't work. And so we've underpinned it by this protocol layer, this, like, these representative tokens, these representative, like, where liquidity is guaranteed. You're only exposing yourself to the asset when you convert and all of that. And that allows investors to kind of vote with their dollar with a little bit of security, right? And
Yeah. So just two questions then. Number one is, since you have this curation type of layer, do you have any concerns about, censorship or any projects that potentially won't be able to get on the platform because people hold certain beliefs or certain views? Are you concerned about that at all?
Yeah. So with the curation, with markets on Theia, so markets are actually they will function as DAOs. So markets and projects are actually both investable assets on the platform. So what we've done is we've duplicated the system for investing into projects with this, like, bonding curve predictable price algorithm for investing into markets. But instead of receiving project tokens that are representative of ownership into a single project, you receive what are called market tokens that are representative of ownership into a market. And these tokens can be held or sold back to the protocol in the same way, but market tokens can be staked back into the market. And when you stake market tokens, you basically claim the ownership that you just bought. So let's say I've staked 10% of all the market tokens into a market. Basically, that comes with certain privileges. And what those privileges are is governance and rev share. So basically, you get voting rights that are worth 10% of the vote in that particular example, and then you get 10% of the revenue that market earns. So really, while a market may start with a single individual or a single group, there's nothing really stopping it from evolving into a broader community that then has to achieve consensus when it comes to onboarding projects, right? So that's how we kind of protect a little bit from tyranny, right? So that, a market owner is like, I'm like the one true guy to onboard one project, right? So markets will evolve into DAOs, and so then, you can be the power of the community. However, we also don't want market creators, like the people who created a market, created an identity for it, did all this work, to immediately just get diluted out of existence to where they have no influence anymore, right? Because that has its own problems as well, right? Like if it becomes too communal and it becomes too like you can have the tyranny of the majority as well, right? To where the market loses its identity and then all that work goes to nothing. And so as a result, when you create a market on Theia, there's actually a small capital contribution. It works out to basically purchasing 10,000 market tokens for a given market. But you're buying them at the very beginning of this bonding curve, so it's super cheap, right? You're buying it basically because each token is like cents at that point. But you take a rather significant stake. And so we've modeled it out to where, unless you decide as a market owner to sell your tokens and stop, being involved in the market anymore, you'll always have some significant say, because mathematically the price will get just so astronomically high that it becomes really difficult to dilute you to a point where you have no say, like no significant say. So we kind of protect markets from becoming tyrannical on the individual side, but then also tyrannical from like somebody just coming in and making a hostile takeover when a market's just getting off the ground, right? So, so that's how we kind of keep things, again, aligned so that the communities always really can be driven towards like just the priorities of like, let's get on the best projects, let's be a good market, let's make some revenue, let's do good work here.
Yeah. Another aspect I wanted to ask you is, because you're only, let's say, giving 5% contribution, or you're choosing the amount that's going to these creators,
yeah,
what's to prevent, speculation from happening in the space? So let's say, like, I'm just throwing money and then I'm waiting for it to go up and sell right away. How are you going to prevent stuff like that happening?
Yeah, so that's one of the big raps that like bonding curves always get, right? Which is totally understandable, because they were like in the NFT space, like the Bored Ape was like a really good example of like I remember when they first, like their first big marketing campaign was like, we're not gonna mint our NFTs on a bonding curve, because that's just a scam, because on the NFT side of things, if it's like an NFT mint, right, you can understand like it encourages people to dogpile, because like, it's like as things start to ramp up, you're like, crap, I got to get in before like it gets super expensive. And, that's just not, it's not healthy. Right. And so as a result, and then also, there's like the sell-off issue, right? Because all you're waiting for like the next guy to like come in before you sell and everything. So there's some ways in which we've mitigated that. So one, for example, is the idea that when you buy in, for example, there's 10% or 5 to 10% or whatever that's lost right out of the gate, right? So you take a loss technically at the very beginning, right? So that means that, if I were to buy a token and then sell it immediately, the chances are that I'll take some form of loss. So that's how we kind of dampen a little bit of the high speed trading, right? Like super high speed, high frequency trading that can be a little bit disruptive, especially to projects at the very beginning, because everybody's trading at the margins. But then also then it's like, okay, well, do I just wait till the next guy to come in and then I just sell, and then we go from speculation there. Really, the reason that we're confident with that is that we have some mechanisms that markets can put in place to like prevent sort of high speed trading. But really, if we were just to treat the system in isolation, if I were an owner of, let's say, 100 market tokens, yes, okay, I could come in and have somebody come in for one over me and then sell one, and then maybe make a little bit of a profit there. But if I were to sell all 100 at once, token number 1 and token number 100 are going to be 100 steps away from each other, right? So marginally speaking, and it's just not as efficient of a way to operate. So like we can kind of disincentivize dumping as a bit of a practice, because the bonding curve price is directly related to liquidity, as opposed to just being just a mechanism for price. Like a lot of times bonding curves are just used for price. Like they're literally just used to like show that, oh, so many people have come in and now like, the price is here. No, really, our bonding curve works in both directions as opposed to just one. Like, the price will come down. So like, that disincentivizes kind of dumping as a practice.
Just a question. Yeah. Picture this scenario. So let's say I set up a fraudulent project, and I'm really great at marketing, hyping it up. So a lot of people buy in and I sell once it goes up. How do you prevent stuff like that happening? Because I think that's pretty easy to do.
Yeah, totally. So if you've just bought like a significant stake at the very beginning and like and just like sold at the top and all that stuff, and because as a project creator, you're the first person, right? So there are some methods in which we basically give a ton of tools to markets. So we give like a ton of tools for both transparency, like due diligence. We understand that markets will do due diligence outside of our platform, but also we give a lot of tools in which they can self-regulate the projects that are underneath them. So like, for example, markets can set maximum basically token allocations at certain price points. So if I was, a market and like I can say like below token price $5, I can only buy like 50 tokens. Now, obviously, people can, they can symbol themselves in and then like go across like a million different wallets, in which case a project can go all the way and in theory do a KYC AML wallet link. Like we're not as super big fans of like narcware, where like people are KYCing and linking that to a wallet because we like the anonymity that crypto has to offer. But if a market wants to do that, they can. However, with our actual bonding curve, the way that we parameterized it is it starts out really quite flat. So if you're a project founder and you buy like a ton of tokens at the beginning, it's really quite flat before it starts to actually take off. And so really a lot of people have got to come in for you to get to a point where you could actually like make a significant return off of dumping literally all of those tokens. And then also your relative effect on the market when you do that becomes less. However, every single we also want to bring in like the social elements. We understand that like there will be bad actors, there will be people that'll try to do that, and we can mitigate that from a mechanical standpoint. But we also want to make sure that there's full transparency from like a quantitative and qualitative standpoint, so that anytime an investor looks at a project, they know exactly how that project's performing on Theia, but also who's invested into it and for how much, right? So if I come in and when they bought in and when they bought in for how much, et cetera. So if I'm an investor and I can go to a project, if I can in theory see that, okay, there was a person that bought in for 50,000 project tokens at the very beginning, and they have when you click on their profile, it's like they don't have a profile, they have no history, they have no they have no trading history, they haven't supported projects, whatever, it's just a shell. That can send a huge red flag immediately, right? So
I think we've seen there's just one coin lately, I think, where they opened up to 10,000 wallets to mine it or something.
Yeah.
I forget what it was called. So how do you prevent against something like that? They can make a couple of transactions and then we see 5,000 investors of all different types. So
right. So because we have a native profile system on the platform, so every wallet is like similar to OpenSea. Every wallet has got a platform or got a profile, and if you click through onto a profile, you can basically see the full breakdown of like what that project's invested in previously, their whole portfolio's performance, the projects that they backed before, how many tokens they converted, how many tokens they've sold. We offer like all these analytics off of a single profile that anybody can view. They're entirely public. And so, in theory, like, yes, you could Sybil across like 10,000 wallets. But if, you come into a project and you just see in that investor community tab, it's just 10,000 project, wallets that are blank profiles, single investments, like no history on the platform, then it can be kind of relatively clear that the project's looking to potentially pump itself. And, again, not to say that this kind of stuff doesn't happen, because you're dealing in Web3 at the end of the day. We want to just give as many tools to investors to make sure that they can combat that properly. And there's ways you can do that mechanically and ways in which you can do that with like social elements and front leading elements and interface elements. And also when a market onboards a kind of a project like this, they're held accountable. Like this is a market's record is permanent as much as a project's record, right? So if a person creates a fraudulent market and a fraudulent project, you can see that both the market and project are fraudulent relatively quickly. If a legitimate market or a half legitimate market were to onboard a project that pulls this kind of crap, then that is immediately evident, and that market reputation and thus its financial outlooks going forward are tainted as a result in quite a significant way. And so in theory, we have a way in which the best actors can rise to the top. And if there are potential bad actors and malicious actors, because we do preempt that, we do expect that, they will be evidently and immediately clear on the platform.
Okay, yeah. So what stage is this project in? How far along are you guys?
Yeah, so all of our architecture on the smart contract side is completed. So everything from our mechanisms for the core smart contract for buying and selling these representative project tokens and then converting them into a native asset. And then when you create a project, you have to deposit the asset, so on and so forth. All of that's completed and running great. It's running on our testnet. And all of our front-facing elements, like the interface of the actual full-on platform, has all been mapped out. We're really confident in it. We think it looks great. And we're building out pretty much the entire front end of the platform in tandem to this. So really, from a core developmental standpoint, we're, I would say a month or two away from full completion. However, we're pushing the launch date to June because we want to take it in stages. We want to decentralize in stages, and we want to lead with quality. So basically, as mentioned with the kind of the community raise, which allows people to kind of interact with us and get a sense and a feel for how it works when there's actually money on the line and so on and so forth. And then when we do our soft launch, basically Theia, the platform, becomes the first market on the platform, the only market on the platform. And then we have made partnerships with some projects that are looking to receive some funding, and then we onboard those. That'll be a curation of about 10 to 15 projects, and that'll be in the next probably around early May kind of territory. And when we do that, we want to grow our community healthily to meet that challenge, right? Okay, we want to grow our pool of investors so that people can invest into those projects. And then we want to grow both the community of investors and the community of role models. That both is on the project side and the market side, so that when we hit the fully permissionless launch in June, we hit the ground running, basically. Like, we're not going to be choosing any winners here as a platform, but you're damn sure that we're going to be offering as much support to the people that we think are doing the right thing and want to, leverage what we have to offer in the right way. And so really it's about taking our time and growing, and obviously leading with the product and making sure that the product is absolutely secure, absolutely, quality first, human-centered design, all of that. But really on the community and the investment side of things, just making sure that everybody who comes in, in our first initial stage is here to do the right thing and it wants to make the platform and all the projects on it grow in the right way. Like, we're confident that our system will result in the right guys rising to the top anyway. But why would you kick that can down the road when you could do it right out of the gate? So that's really kind of where we are.
That's awesome. Where can people go to find more information on your project or come in contact with you? Where can they reach out?
Yeah, of course. So we have our website, which is Theia, that's Theia.finance, where you can see our landing page, which gives us a link to our white paper, as well as links to join our Discord, and also all of our social links, Medium articles, etc. And you kind of get a feel for how the platform works on the landing page as well. And then we have our Twitter at Theia Labs, Theia_Labs, which is where we'll post. We post the majority of our updates, everything from the how the platform's going to partnerships we've made, all of that, and that should be all ramping up very soon. And there's ways in which you can get into our Discord and our community from all those channels. So yeah.
What's the origin of the Theia name?
So Theia is the Greek. So here's where I'm going to launch into our pretentious marketing. No, Theia is the Greek goddess that endowed things with intrinsic value. So basically, when you would give something to her, you give a block of gold to her, and she'd say, this gold is worth this much, basically. And we thought that was a really elegant kind of analogy for what the protocol does. Like you're giving, people for, it's basically just a really cool model for price discovery, right? You put the money in, the community puts the money in, and they take it out, and they find an equilibrium about, what a project's truly valued at, for a given stage. And then the value can and the project can deliver, according to that value. And then also Theia is the name of the planet that basically crashed into what was the Earth to form the actual Earth, and it kicked up a lot of the molten fragments, and a part of that broke off to become the moon. And so that was really, again, kind of a cool analogy for us, where it's like you have this community that comes in and kind of collides with the project, and then the project crystallizes into what it is, and then the community always stays, orbiting that project. And so, that's where we kind of came up with our logo. That's where we came up with a lot of our ethos. And so we thought it was just kind of a cool name to stick with.
Awesome. Just a few questions then. No, I think your project is awesome. I'm very curious to see how it goes. We obviously wish you the best.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about the crypto space, investing wise? What are you really doing right now? Because I know everyone's like concerned with everything what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah. So, like, right place, right time. Was pretty liquid in the space, especially on the NFT side, right? So, as things progressed, I got to stay a little bit above the clouds, right? Like I wasn't necessarily like coming in late and then getting really dogged into the trenches, but I saw that, right? Like, I'm still extraordinarily bullish on the tech, and my ethos has always been start with the technology and see how it's being leveraged, and then work back to the asset. So, and then work back to the brand, right? So if I'm looking at like OzKey or Bored Apes in terms of like two blue chip PFP NFT projects, I'm like, okay, is it just speculative nonsense, or are they actually doing something like really worthwhile here? And that's how I'd kind of make my decision about whether I'd come in for another NFT or a single one or multiple. And
not just NFTs, like
crypto. Well, yeah, in crypto in general, yeah. Right? Yeah. So in the crypto side of things, I think a lot of it is tied to integration, right? Like, there's if you're somebody who holds Bitcoin is a bit of a religion from a technical standpoint. Obviously, it has limitations, but the fact that it's an entirely inelastic asset to demand is pretty important, right? Because that just means that, okay, if the value that we ascribe to Bitcoin stays the same, and it kind of represents a bit of like the S&P 500 for the industry, for the sector, then as more and more people integrate into crypto, and as it becomes like 10% of Americans having some sort of crypto exposure to 20 to 30 to 40 to 50, then the value that Bitcoin has can only go up. Because like, you hear like, I can't remember who said it. It was like, there's more millionaires in the world than there are Bitcoin. So in theory, if everybody in the world had, Bitcoin, then one Bitcoin would be worth more than $1 million, right? And that's just it's just an integration thing, right? So I think if DeFi actually has legs and doesn't go through like a similar sort of dark age that it did after 2016, where things kind of took a downturn, then it can only sort of snowball. Now there are really significant attack vectors that can mess that up. Like, one's regulation, obviously. Like, it's very easy for something like the SEC or the US government to come in and just put a lid on the whole thing, like in a lot of ways. In which a lot of the decentralization that comes with Web3 and everything would just kind of peter out, and everything would go back to normal. It would just be a reskin of the current financial system, right? Instead of JP Morgan and Chase, it's Coinbase and FTX. It's like, it could be its own sector, but it's run along the same lines. And that's not a bad thing if you're in those areas, but if you're not, it kind of sucks, right? I
think everyone in crypto would say that's a bad thing.
Yeah. So it's like, like, that's not fun, right? And I don't think funnily enough, I think that weirdly, I think a lot of people behind those bodies kind of see the utility and are like, okay, there's a bit of a renaissance going in terms of finance, and we need to figure out how we do this the right way. So like, there's that element. And then there's also like the fact that, when you have a war between Ukraine and Russia, and a lot of people who were where Russian sanctions were tanking that economy, a lot of people in that whole area were looking for liquidity in crypto, right? So, that's why you saw like a bit of a pump in Ether and Bitcoin after the initial dip when that whole conflict started. And that's cool in the short term, but that's not necessarily a good thing, because that's, viewing crypto as simply a store of value as opposed to actually a leverageable piece of tech, right? So I think what you're gonna see is, like, for me at least, you're gonna see like nodes, almost like actual blocks on the chain, where like, Bitcoin's doing its own thing, it's a store of value, but then you got like high speed networks like Solana that are handling a lot of like peer-to-peer transactions at like a price point of like $1 to $5, or like, really low level stuff. And then you got like Ethereum, what the hell they're going to do? Like, are they going to stay with the current proof of work, mechanisms that they have, or are they going to finally go to POS after saying they're going to do it for years and years? And I know the problem with that chain is that it's like updating it is a nightmare, right? So it's like, there's a lot of uncertainty there, but I think really, if you were to ask me, where I think a lot of the transformational stuff that will drive the industry forward is going to happen at the ground level. It's going to be like people using crypto for a period, like a transaction that's $1 or like 50 cents or $10 or $50, just because it's a more efficient mechanism sometimes. It's like a more efficient mechanism for digital assets, for like some physical assets, and for cross-border transactions. There's, I think, really like, that's where you'll see like a lot of the broader integration, like for the common folk, I guess, if you want to say, so, if you're looking for a cool bet, look for networks that can handle that, right? Like, high speed, low gas fee networks, right? Like if you're Avalanche on the EVM side, or like Solana has some issues. Avalanche has done really well. So I think they're really pushing really hard to be that kind of solution. Or Ethereum just kind of updates itself so that it can handle that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think really
Ethereum, let's not get started on that one.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, I don't know if you, I remember when the Ethereum almost split back in August. That was why, it was because they were just like trying to, it was literally a hot fix, and the whole thing almost melted down. Like, if you're telling me that they're gonna get through a whole POS rework, yeah, like
and not just that, they didn't even solve the pricing issues.
Yeah, I know. It's like, it's weird. Like, I don't even know. Like Ethereum.
And well, I'll be honest, me and Andrew are biased because we mine a lot of crypto,
right?
but we just don't see them solving these issues, because
that's the thing too. I was like, like everybody talks about POS like there isn't like a sea of miners that are like immediately going to get totally screwed over if that just switches, right? And I'm like, yeah, it's just like, you can't blame them too, like I totally get it, like it's like, proof of work does have its absolutely, like, it's worthwhile in a lot of ways, and that's part of the reason why Ethereum is as like rigid as it is. Like when you POS is sometimes more vulnerable because you have to maintain that sort of critical mass, right? And that leads to more centralization than decentralization,
Yeah, it allows whales to form really easily, I find, in proof of stake, right? Because if I get in first and I own the largest share of the coin, I can just stake it indefinitely, and I'll always own the same percentage.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's just like, that's where you get, mass centralization. That's where you get like 60% of Solana being owned by centralized backers. It's like, it just doesn't work, right? And it leaves them open for some serious attacks, right, and vulnerabilities, which you see on the Solana network, right? So it's like, crap, what are you going to do? You know, like, do you stick to the EVM enabled way, but you like try and just optimize gas to its like the most finite thing? And then you like, Ether's come a long way. I mean, like, obviously back in August, like people were paying like $500 in gas for like a single like mint on like an NFT.
Oh, that was a great time to be mining. The returns are insane.
I remember on like the Oni Force drop was insane. It was in August. I remember because I'd been whitelisted for that, so I'd avoided it. But I saw it when the public drop happened. It sold out in like 5 seconds. But basically, one person had, with a bot, basically minted at like 100 GWEI or something, and like taken like 100 mints, and then immediately the network just was constricted, and gas went up to like $5,000, and I was like, this is absolutely insane. Like, this is just insanity. And now it's like, it's so weird to think about that being a thing, you know, and because it has, like, they have solved a lot of the pricing, and obviously more people have come into mind and everything, so it's fixed. But yeah, I mean, like, look, I think I agree that proof of work is like really necessary, especially if you're going to keep if you're going to keep things decentralized, if you're going to keep things like also like more secure and more like, you know, like, it's just, so it's, there's a lot of tough like road to navigate on the technical side. But really, I think everybody gets the objectives, right? Like, we got to get gas down. Like, transaction volume has to be consistent, and the network can't like lay an egg because suddenly more transactions need to come in. Especially if like all this fintech crap wants to come in, you know, the network has to handle it. So, you know, that's where, like, you know, I think you got guys like Abax or Solana that are trying to come in and compete because they're like, okay, well, you know, we can handle like high transaction speed, high transaction volume, like Wax is coming in, like, you know, we handle more like NFT transactions than like, you know, Ethereum and Avalanche combined. And it's like, well, yeah, okay, fine. But like, so, you know, maybe the answer is in specialization, you know, maybe that's like multi-chain specialization, right? And then cross-chain compatibility. But
that's what Polkadot is doing. That's why I'm excited about that one.
Yeah. So, you know, I think that's not an unreasonable take, right? You know, there's not going to be one true chain, but, you know, it's like, what is the chain that carries the most weight, right? Like, is Ethereum the place where like digital assets actually matter the most? Or is it like, and then is Solana the place where like, you know, you're like a lot of video game and play to earn like channels happen because it's just a lot more conducive to that, you know? I don't know. It's like, but either way, I think if you break things down to their principles, you can kind of see where things are going to go.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on like Cardano or Polkadot? Do you have any? Do you think there's speculation? Do you think they actually offer valuable tech?
I think Cardano is a little wild. Obviously it's cool, it's fun, but like, I think Polkadot has got a little bit more legs in comparison. Yeah, obviously they're doing a lot of the spearheading in terms of like cross-chain compatibility and bridging gaps and everything. And
the parachains is really powerful. I think once we start seeing applications there, it's gonna be very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a similar thing with like Avalanche and their like subnet tech, you know, like obviously Avalanche is gearing itself to be super customizable to a single protocol or dApp, right? So it's like you can kind of make the system work and run it on a virtual machine and specialize it and utilize it to what your needs are, and scale with that customization, right? And so I think, you know, Polkadot's obviously trying to just be like, you know, it's sort of a similar thing with like, you know, like Cosmos to an extent was like, you know, kind of trying, they were a little bit more in their own ecosystem, but, you know, Polkadot's obviously trying to like just make a name for themselves as like the arbiter, right? And obviously if you can do that correctly, you have intrinsic value, like by like just consequence of doing that. So yeah. I know. I think Cardano's a little like, I don't know. Like, I think they're a bit of a religion. Like, I think so. I dig what they do. I really do. But like, I do think sometimes that it's just a bit of like, it's like they're just people like rally behind Cardano because it's Cardano. I don't know.
I feel like it was pumped because I know when like it was going up to $3, I was reading into the technology. I wanted to become more familiar with it. I'm like, it doesn't really offer anything unique compared to other cryptocurrencies I found. It's
Yeah.
so I don't think it's one that holds, like you said, some kind of value, like Polkadot at least is trying to do something. Avalanche
Yeah.
is doing something. Solana is trying to do something. I don't really
Yeah.
see where Cardano fits among those.
Yeah, it's like when people say like, oh, you can mint NFTs on like Bitcoin. I'm like, yeah, but it's like landing a 747 on a pair of toothpicks. It's like, why would you make your life that difficult when you could already do it on Ether? And so it's like, why would you go to Cardano when you could like already do it on Ether? It's like, it's just like, or it's just not really. It's like I know I could be wrong, but like I think it's just a bit of like. A lot of people are in on it, right? So it's just they're kind of holding steady, and there's enough there that people can stay, right? So people are confident with the pump because it's like there's enough there.
Yeah, it was actually shocking to me when I found out, I think a few podcasts ago, that someone was telling me that you can mint NFTs on the Bitcoin Lightning Network. I'm like, that's crazy to me. Like, why would you go through all that effort?
I know, it's like I would do it simply to have it because it's like I feel like it's like a cool, like it's almost like a mantelpiece. It's like it's like I went through the journey and I've come out the end with like this, but it's just so unnecessarily complicated. It's just not even like it's just wild.
It's basically a layer 2 or layer 3 solution. I don't even know what to call it.
It's just so convoluted, but it makes sense, right? Because Bitcoin's like it's the assembly language of blockchain in many ways, right?
Yeah.
So obviously it's not going to have like the same functionality, it's like with smart contracts that Ether does or anything, but it's the core fundamental, right? So that's why I think people treat it confidently as the store of value because it's non-inflationary. It's entirely finite. It does its job from a transactional standpoint, even though it's not like as nice to transact as like a stable coin or Ether, or like you can still transact it and it's a good store of value. So it's definitely necessary.
Yeah, I agree with you. So which coins are you watching then? Like if you had next 6 months to a year, which ones would you be looking at?
I think I'd be looking at AVAX really pretty significantly. I'd look at AVAX, Solana, maybe Wax is a dark horse because it is true that they do handle like more transactions from a pure volume standpoint than even Ether does on the NFT side of things. The thing with Wax is that it's kind of like really decentralized. It's like they got like their dev team is like they're great, but they're quite corporate. It's like so that could appeal, like especially if like the gaming industry is trying to like actually leverage NFTs in long term and more like AAA development teams and MMOs and stuff get involved, and like Wax could conceivably be a really quick destination. But it's by no means a guarantee, so that's why I think it's a bit of a dark horse. But definitely AVAX, definitely I would say Solana too, because I just think I think they've established themselves too much. I think they've got too much I think they're doing too much that's good, even though they kind of stumble every so often. I do think they're really doing well. And then maybe I would either, I don't want to say Ape because like that's just like so like you're hopping on the bandwagon, but I do think that if the way that they're approaching the concept of the metaverse is correct, like I think the metaverse is like one of the most misused terms, and so like especially like when I see it on like CNBC or something, I'm just like, God, like I think of it as much more of an all-encompassing thing, and I do think that there are hardware limitations to that full integration. Like even if you're go the full Black Mirror route and you're talking AR and VR, the hurdles that result in those kind of almost dystopian futures aren't software based, they're entirely hardware based. It's entirely like whether it's VR or augmented reality, and they kind of tug in both directions. Those, so all the blockchain side of things can do is kind of ready itself for when that hurdle gets cleared. And then if it does, then they're like jump on top of it. And so in terms of what can be done right now, you kind of have to view things in terms of, well, what currently works, right? If you're talking about what are the most active like online communities from a social standpoint, it's generally like RPGs, MMOs, kind of video games that have actual objectives. And so obviously Yuga Labs has made it pretty clear that their verse isn't going to be just some sort of reskinned VR chat. It's actually going to be some sort of involved deal. Now, whether they can deliver on that, I don't know. But like, they're clearly thinking about it in the right way in terms of like, you can't fake this kind of stuff. You can't just say the word metaverse and then expect thousands of people to come and flock in. So I do think they're handling it well. And obviously they built a really good brand. So I think I could conceivably see like Ape being like in the $30 to $40 range by the end of the year, in theory, if they do deliver. I would say also, I think Sandbox, like Sand and Decentraland, like those two coins, mostly because they are so freaking resilient. Like I have never seen, like Decentraland like ignores crypto as a whole. Like literally,
I wish I bought into Decentraland plots. Yeah. I was looking into it like 2 years ago and I didn't do anything.
I got lucky. I had a friend who convinced me to get some. So I've been sitting well, but like. Oh,
nice. Do you own a plot of land?
Yeah, I own like a decent couple chunks. Yeah.
Oh my, you've made a ton then.
Like I didn't get into Sand, which is the shitty part, but Decentraland, like the actual coin, it's like you can watch its performance. Like Bitcoin, Ethereum, everything will take a turn and then it'll just be in the green. Like it's just like it's rigid. Like clearly they've outlined a community that is like totally bought in. Very like they get a consistent user base, consistent transactions, consistent like, and that goes to show for Sand as well. Like Sand generally hits higher highs and lower lows in comparison, and Decentraland is like a little bit more steady in terms of like the virtual real estate side of things. But I just think they've done an extraordinarily good job in terms of how to like capture a community and then like kind of be almost have Kevlar to the rest of the speculation in the market. Like even if you look at the floors for the NFTs for plots on Decentraland, they are pegged. I mean, they are really solidified, and I think that is rare to come by in the whole sector.
I totally agree with you. Well, I think we're out of time, but it was a pleasure to have you on. I think we could talk about this for days.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you again for joining us. When your product launches, please let us know. We'd love to share and talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Obviously, like, we think we could be building something cool here, and we're trying to solve some problems. But really, anytime I could just get on and riff about this kind of stuff, it's always just fun. So, yeah, I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Now for our listeners, the Metaverse Fashion Week is going on right now in Decentraland. It's the first one. So me and Andrew will be doing a special probably tomorrow covering it. And so stay tuned for that. I think it'll be a great time. All right. See you guys.